of truth. It says we're alive. It says we're recording. Okay, you should have. Okay, we're gonna go back to Instagram,
Hmm.
and we'll click go live here. We'll have our comment section. I think the video is a little lagging there, so we're gonna let it catch up. Isaac, do you have everything working on your end? Does it look like
Getting
it's
there, getting there.
okay? Well, I have two people join our live already, so we know it's working.
Perfect. Great to hear.
Hi, everybody. While we're setting up the technology side of this interview and podcast, please say hi. Tell us where you're from and start thinking about questions you want to submit to Isaac or me. We're both registered dietitians. Isaac specializes in blood sugar management. As you can see by the name of our interview, we'll be talking about mastering blood sugar balance. So please say hi, ask questions, and I will be watching the comment section and maybe taking notes while we having an interview, and then we'll address those questions. So this way we don't jump back and forth. Okay, I
Perfect. I think
think.
we're good. I think we're good.
Okay, you're good on your
Yep.
end.
Good on my end.
Amazing. Fantastic. Well, hi everyone. Today on Hashimoto's Nutrition RX, I'm thrilled to have Isaac Pohlman, a registered dietitian and the founder of the Pohlman Institute. Isaac is a recognized expert in blood sugar regulation, insulin sensitivity, and functional nutrition, with years of expertise helping clients optimize their metabolic health. He brings a science backed, personalized approach to managing chronic conditions and enhancing overall well being. Isaac's insights into balancing blood sugar, improving thyroid health, and addressing underlying imbalances are transformative for so many of us looking to take control of our health. So, in this interview, you will learn how blood sugar regulations affect your thyroid health and autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto's. Isaac will explore and share advices on managing blood sugar, reducing inflammation, and improving insulin sensitivities. Tools that will help you support not just your blood sugar, but your thyroid function as well. You will discover how stress, circadian rhythm, and even trends like CGM can play a huge role in the balancing of your energy, improving symptoms, and taking control of your health. So, without further ado, let's dive into this conversation. Isaac, welcome.
Yeah. Thanks so much for that introduction, Natalia. It's great to be here.
Yes, we're so lucky to have you. Thank you for dedicating a whole hour to us. So I'm so
Yeah.
excited. We have so many questions. Well, I have so many questions from myself, from just being as a registered dietitian, working
Mhm.
in Hashimoto's space. But I also just this frequently asked questions that I get from my clients, and I hear on Instagram. I just pile them all up, and we gonna throw them all at you. So,
Sounds great.
everybody's buckle up. Now, Isaac, before we get started, I would love to
Yeah.
start by hearing about your journey. What led you to become a registered dietitian, and why did you choose to specialize in blood sugar management?
Yeah, I think Natalia, it started for me in high school very early. I was 15 years old, and I was at that time an athletic, energized teenager who, seemingly was on track to play like college soccer. That was my specialty at that time. And then fast forward 8 years later, and I'm chronically fatigued. I'm just being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and I'm full of symptoms. And so, quite a big stark contrast within just a few years' time. And I had just made it through a bunch of symptoms during my undergrad, and I had low testosterone and low thyroid labs. I had chronic acne and food allergies and sensitivities. And
Mhm.
so I just made it through all of those different pieces. And now I enter grad school, at University of Michigan because I was inspired basically based on that progress. That wow, this is super interesting. I learned a lot. I was able to improve a lot in a short period of time. I want to pursue this as more of a master's degree and get my registered dietitian license. And so during that time, my second year, I started noticing some weird symptoms, and I started feeling really thirsty. And that was really out of the ordinary. Normally, I wasn't chugging down gallons of water a day, and it
Mhm.
just shifted in the spring of 2017. And then I started peeing frequently, like 20 times a day. I'm like, wow, there's something
Mhm.
off here. And then I started tracking my calories, and I was eating about 3,500 calories a day, but losing like 20 pounds within the course of like 2 weeks, right? And then I felt extremely tired after meals, especially with carbs. And as soon as I started connecting those dots, I was like, wow, do I have diabetes here? Like what's going on? And I tossed it up to stress at that time because I figured there's no way. Well, a week went by, and I started getting more and more extreme symptoms of that nature. And I thought, yeah, I got to check this out. And so I purchased
Mhm.
a glucometer, which is a monitor to check your blood sugar. And the next morning, I checked it, and it was a 275. And
Uh-huh.
so, normally that is supposed to be between 70 and 99. And so by that point, I knew I probably had some form of diabetes. It's just a matter of, hey, is this type 1 or type 2? And I had a
Mhm.
family history of type 1, so that was probably what I was leaning towards. And obviously, stereotypically, those
Mhm.
that are a little bit leaner tend to be, have type 1. So I got the antibody test a week later back from the doctor that said I indeed had type 1. Now, at that point, I was feeling very defeated. I've just been through all these symptoms. I just made it my way through that, and now I have to deal with this again. And so momentarily, I think I felt bad for myself, like being that in that
Mhm.
position, like not catching a break. But that quickly shifted into, wow, I have such an opportunity here because not only do I have a nutrition background, but I have a holistic background in solving problems that I just went through. And then
Mhm.
now I have this type 1 diabetes. And so it gives me credibility, especially from a blood sugar perspective, that I'm in it with you. And so that's what really
Mhm.
shifted my perspective to blood sugar. And I started off with a A1C of 9.7, and through the things that I've learned within that 3-month period of time, I got it down to 5.6. And that wasn't doing any fasting, that wasn't doing any keto, low carb diets, or taking like an excessive amount of insulin. That was just with root cause foundational approaches.
Mhm.
And I thought, wow, if I could do this with myself, I can definitely help other people. And so now to this day, we have formed the Pullman Institute, where we have a total of 7 practitioners, where we work with people around the world that struggle to eat carbs without having a spike or a crash in their blood sugar.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your personal story. It makes I don't think it's necessary to have a certain disease and to relate to your patients, but I think it helps. I think,
Yeah.
like I have Hashimoto's and I only works with people with Hashimoto's. I can relate, truly relate. And I'm my own, guinea pig. And just like you said, like you learned so much in 3 months, dropped your hemoglobin N1C in what half almost, right? From
Yep.
nine and something to 5 to a healthy range. So I think it's such an important part of journey, and
Mhm.
I'm so glad that you dedicated your learning and everything that you studied in school. You dedicated to helping people just like yourself. I think it's a big part.
Yeah, yep, and that's one of the first things that many people will say to me is like, "Hey, I wanted to sign up with you guys because you and a lot of your practitioners have type 1 or have been through similar
Mhm.
experiences." And having that personal connection, I think, is very important. And I think, Natalia, you just highlighted that too for yourself as well.
And actually, not to jump through the questions, but I had to wear a CGM, continuous glucose monitoring device, on myself. I don't have type 1 or type 2, but I needed to know how to relate to my clients
Yep,
that do use that. So that's just a little side notes. Things we do to relate, to make sure that we are the best practitioners we can be.
yep, 100%.
Um, so now, why should everyone be concerned about blood sugar regulations, regardless? Like, what if people don't have type 1 or type 2 diabetes? Why should we still be concerned about blood sugar regulation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And truthfully, I think, that's the stereotypical message of like, if you have diabetes, you're going to be checking your blood sugar more frequently, and that's definitely true. Like we're like people that don't have diabetes, like I don't expect them to be checking their blood sugar or slap on a CGM necessarily.
Mhm,
Um, so there is some truth to that, that there's more emphasis with diabetes, but what's also true is that people who do not have diabetes also have blood sugar, right? That's also a
mhm,
thing. And so when we look at blood sugar regulation, what I kind of look at it as is our proverbial gas tank, similar to how our car operates on gas or electric these days. Um, that's their fuel source. Well, our fuel source that we run onto, that for me to conduct this podcast, for you to sit here, we run
mhm,
off of blood sugar. That's our immediate fuel source. And if there's discrepancies with that, where it spikes up or it drops,
mhm,
that's where it starts to create chaos. And where we can kind of lean into that a little bit more is what occurs at the cell level. So let's just say that you had a high blood sugar, right? Your blood sugar is spiking up maybe into the 200s. Well, you have a lot of energy within your bloodstream, but that energy is not making it to the cell level where we really need it, right? So there's an
mhm,
energy crisis. Same thing when you have a low blood sugar, drops below 70, right? You're maybe feeling a little bit more shaky, dizzy. There's not enough in the bloodstream to draw from, and therefore there's not enough at the cell level to take in either. And so it's a very similar reaction. The only difference between a high and a low blood sugar is what occurs at the blood level. And so
mhm,
with each case, there's a deficiency in energy at the cell level, which we have a great backup system to help with, so we don't pass
mhm,
away and die. And that's called our stress system. And so stress kicks in. It helps to break down our body's resources that we have for energy, which help to resolve the energy crisis that we have at the cell level. Now, that can be very helpful, especially in the short term, to
mhm,
get us by. The problem is that many of us rely on that for far too long. And what happens is we increase that stress on our system. And stress over time does a few different things. It inactivates hormones, especially thyroid hormone,
mhm,
preventing us from either producing it or being able to use it properly. It suppresses our immune system, right? And over time, if we're not able to release as much, stress hormones, which
mhm,
comes as a result of being stressed for some time, we don't get the energizing benefits of it. We don't get the anti-inflammatory benefits of it, at least in the short term. And as a result, we can be more at risk for autoimmune conditions. We can be more
mhm,
at risk for fatigue, for blood sugar swings throughout the day. We can be at more risk for weight gain, right? We can be at more risk for any kind of thyroid issue. And so I look at it as energy management. And so if
mhm.
anybody wants to feel at their most optimal self, balancing blood sugar should be at the top of their priority.
I agree with you 100% because blood sugar regulation is a foundation to overall health. It doesn't matter what what problems we're talking about, type 1, type 2, Hashimoto's, rheumatoid arthritis, anything you pick, any disease, I think blood sugar regulation it's in the base and the foundation of that because like you said it helps maintain energy levels, mood stability, brain function. But when it comes to thyroid health, blood sugar issues can exacerbate thyroid function, especially in somebody with Hashimoto's, where the immune system is already attacking the thyroid. And insulin resistance and elevated blood sugar can worsen inflammation, which is negatively impacts the thyroid hormone production and the whole gland.
Mm,
And of course, blood sugar imbalance, it triggers, like I said, inflammation, which is already an issue in those of us with Hashimoto's. It's, unstable blood sugar can make it harder to manage Hashimoto's symptoms like fatigue, weight gain, brain fog, and proper blood sugar regulation supports better energy, right? We sleep better, and it's just overall symptoms do improve. So, foundation, we're setting up the foundation, right?
100%.
Now, to give our listeners a clear understanding of what to look for in their own health, can you talk about some classic signs that our blood sugar needs attention? I know you mentioned
Yep.
frequent urination, thirst. Anything else that people
Yeah.
should look for, even if they don't have type 1 or type 2 diabetes?
Yeah, 100%. And the way that I look at it, there's two different metrics that you can look at. You can look at the numbers, which is where most of the attention gets, right? Your A1C, your blood sugar. What I often find that isn't tested though, especially in terms of numbers, is like a fasting insulin. And that is particularly missing, especially if someone has like, signs of insulin resistance, which we'll get to in a second,
Mhm.
but has like a normal A1C. Like that is often not tested. And so that is one category that you can look at, getting those numbers checked of like blood sugar before
Mhm.
or after meals, in addition to like A1C and fasting insulin. But the other category that I think isn't talked about enough is what I call biofeedback, which would include all those symptoms that we touched on already, and a little bit more, because biofeedback are basically the signals that your body's giving you whether something is working or not. And the more that your blood sugar is dysregulated, the more negative signs of biofeedback that your body will display. And so one of those is feeling tired immediately after eating,
Mhm.
especially if that meal has carbs, right? You're feeling sleepy, you take a nap, like a food coma sort of feeling.
Mhm.
That will typically be the case. We often see that with afternoon sleepiness, so like 2, 3, 4 o'clock, which we're coming up on for many people. That's
Mhm.
when they need like a coffee or need like a snack to kind of get that boost again. So we see that quite a bit. For those that have more insulin resistance, we see weight gain around the center of the body,
Mhm.
especially around their abdomen. We see skin tags. We see like a dark line on the back of their neck at times as well.
Mhm.
We also see, and this is just depends on the person, but we also see some people that will crash after they eat. And so that can be called hypoglycemia or reactive hypoglycemia,
Mhm.
where their body is just overproducing insulin. And initially, that can cause your blood sugar to crash. And so they might feel dizzy, lightheaded, shaky after eating. And it might have to eat like frequently throughout the day, like every 1 to 2 hours for
Mhm.
them to feel okay. We also have folks that have appetite issues, either way, where they won't feel hungry at all, or they'll feel hungry every 1 to 2 hours and have to
Mhm.
constantly eat throughout the day. So we see that. We see those that wake up in the middle of the night, like you said, that need to pee frequently, like
Mhm.
1, 2, 3 times during the middle of the night. We have those that don't handle stress very well, like anything minor, really react to, and it really bothers them. Moody, and we also see
Mhm.
clients that have higher blood pressure, higher cholesterol as well. So those are a few different ones. Now, as far as conditions, we also often see like autoimmune conditions rise. We often see hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's tend to rise as well. And of course, the longer that exists, forms of diabetes as well.
Mhm. So you named a lot of signs and symptoms to watch out for. I think this is like you named all of them.
Yeah.
It's so generalized and it can apply to any other disease. So we have to to be, always listen to our body, right? To figure out, and I always say test, don't guess. So if you have any, if you're watching or listening to us, if you have any of the symptoms that Isaac just mentioned, make sure you get at least your blood sugar checked, because I think it's one of the most inexpensive tests and the quickest one to come back. Now, all those signs and symptoms are indicative of insulin resistance. Isaac, can you explain a little bit what insulin resistance is and how can we support our bodies to utilize insulin properly?
Yeah, of course. Broken down simply, it's the inability to use the hormone insulin. That's all it is. And insulin is a hormone that helps your body lower blood sugar. And essentially, you can think about it as like being the mailman. It delivers, like just like a mailman delivers mail from the post office to your mailbox. Insulin delivers carbs or energy from your bloodstream to your cells so that can get it and use it, and you can feel good, right? Well,
Mhm.
when we have insulin resistance, what ends up happening is your body is really relying on insulin to manage your blood sugar. And there are a million ways to manage blood sugar. Insulin is just one of those hormones that helps us to do
Mhm.
that. Now, if we're not able to utilize other resources outside of just insulin, our body has no choice but to release a lot of it to take care
Mhm.
of that blood sugar spike that we're getting, because it always wants to keep things in homeostasis. In other words, within balance. And so it will release a lot of insulin to be able to do that if we don't have resources to help. And when our body is releasing more insulin, it can help to temporarily take care of that blood sugar spike, so our blood sugar stays within normal range. But over time, especially as we don't have those other resources, and we can get into that maybe later on, what ends up happening is we rely more and more on insulin to regulate our blood sugar. And over time, the cells of our body start to become desensitized to that, meaning that it doesn't work as well. And so imagine like you have a lock and a key, and you've put that key in that lock over like 2,000 times, right?
Mhm.
That key probably deforms maybe a little bit. It doesn't look as well, or maybe it doesn't fit in within the lock.
Mhm.
And that's similar to insulin resistance. Essentially, that insulin is no longer working because the body has been so bombarded with the sheer amount of insulin within your body, right? And so as a
Mhm.
result, the energy or the carbs within your bloodstream is not delivered from your blood to the cells where we really need it, and therefore blood sugar starts to rise. And it's really stubborn to get down unless you improve the variables that help your body rely less on insulin to manage your blood sugar,
Mhm.
right? And so as a result of insulin resistance, we see people that have higher blood sugars, particularly in the morning at first, and then
Mhm.
after and before meals. We see, large amounts of insulin, like a fasting insulin. We'll see that pretty high, typically significantly above 10. We'll see blood sugar significantly above 100, and then an A1C, above 5.7. And so we have the numbers like we just talked about, and then we have the symptoms. Some people are really aware. Some people are really body aware. I like to say men are a little bit less body aware,
Mhm.
and so they might not notice symptoms, but they often go into a lot of the symptoms that we just described. Mood disturbances,
Mhm.
brain fog, fatigue, sleep, stress issues, low ability to tolerate carbs. And then something
Mhm.
like weight loss resistance or even like fertility issues. We find a lot of that within our practice as well.
Mhm.
And so, ways to help to take the pressure or the strain off of insulin will help your body become less insulin resistant. And so, that could be something as simple as walks, that could be something as simple as finding dense, nutritious meals that
Mhm.
contain a lot of good vitamins and minerals that help your body process those carbs better. So, you're not releasing so much insulin as a
Mhm.
result. We have one of the biggest things is circadian rhythm balance, which we can get into in more detail too. When your circadian
Mhm.
rhythm or the hormones of your body is misaligned, you're automatically going to be more insulin resistant and more carb intolerant.
Mhm.
So that is a huge one. And then across the board, if you have blood sugar issues, you automatically have stress issues.
Mhm.
And stress we can define in a lot of different ways, but essentially it's your body overproducing stress hormones in response to your environment. And you could be really stressed, you'd have a lot of things going on, or you might be thinking, you don't have a stressful life at all, yet your body's still overreacting to your environment.
Mhm.
And so when I look at that is how can we improve your stress response so we're no longer secreting so much stress hormone in response to your environment. And when we can do that, we're less reliant on insulin to manage our blood sugar and more reliant on other levers to be able to do that.
Mhm. Thank you so much for breaking down exactly what insulin resistant is, what signs and symptoms to watch out for, and especially if you're male, you need to be a little bit more mindful of of what your body's trying to to tell you. So, since you started talking about food and how to minimize the insulin resistance, right, and increase insulin sensitivities, how do you feel about the classic approaches to blood sugar regulations that often recommend completely cutting out carbs? Like, why might that approach miss the mark and potentially worsen the thyroid health?
Yeah, yeah. I think this is a huge problem that that has grown. I think a little bit, especially with the rise of the CGM movement, which I think is great. Like people can biohack all they want, and if that's up their alley, great. I think it's put so much pressure on to get perfect numbers, or like if we're using the CGM, a straight line across the whole day. And if we look at anybody that's even metabolically healthy that does not have any blood sugar issues, even they will not have a straight line, and that's not a bad thing. It's a very normal thing. And the reason why that's the case is if we look at other measurements within the body, let's just say blood pressure and heart rate. If I were to start doing jumping jacks and push-ups right now while I'm talking to you guys, I would be out of breath. And when we look at that a little bit deeper, we know that my heart rate is rising. We also know that my blood pressure is rising. And there's a good reason why that's happening. It's to facilitate blood flow to my muscles that are working, that are working out, and back to my brain so I don't pass out when I'm doing this workout. But if we looked at that in a vacuum and said, "Hey, Isaac, wow, your heart rate is really going crazy, or your blood pressure is hitting like cardiovascular risk numbers," like if we looked at that in a vacuum, we might see that, wow, this is pretty serious, not realizing it that during exercise, it's actually beneficial that that comes up. Now,
Mhm.
how could we, look at that from a blood sugar perspective? What could possibly be the benefit of a blood sugar rise? And I want to make sure I preface this. I'm not talking about like a blood sugar spike where we're going into 200s, 300s, 400s. I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about a small rise and a fall down. And the reason why that's important is because it allows your liver to soak up that extra glucose, similar to like a sponge would to water, right? It soaks it up. And that liver plays a huge role in your blood sugar regulation as well as your overall health for a few different reasons. When we have stored, carbohydrates in our liver, which is called glycogen, it lowers stress on the body because we don't need to go to that stress response that we talked about before. We
Mhm.
can literally utilize the energy that we have in our liver to be able to take care of, energy crisis, which is great. So it takes stress off the body. Number two, it helps to prevent low blood sugar from happening, which also helps with regulating stress. Number three, and probably one of the most important things in the entire body, is it helps to activate thyroid hormone. And
Yep.
that's one of the most important reactions that we see body wide because thyroid hormone, the active form, impacts every single cell in the body, the health
Mhm.
of every single cell. So if you think about every single cell, that's mental health, that's feeling calm, feeling less stressed, less moody, right? That's physical health, digestion, energy, sleep. That's lab values, A1C, blood sugar, blood pressure, thyroid, antibodies, right? So
Mhm.
it helps to regulate all of those. But if we're just siloed thinking and saying, "Hey, I have high blood sugar, I have blood sugar issues, carbs raise my blood sugar, therefore I should just get rid of carbs," we're missing
Mhm.
such a huge piece that oftentimes ends up backfiring on people, especially the women that we work with, where they end up maybe helping their blood sugar temporarily, but they end up making 10 other things worse because they're just
Mhm.
focused on one metric.
I agree. This narrow thinking, either you do in a CGM or just checking your blood sugar through the prick, it's micromanaging. And for someone without type 1 diabetes or uncontrolled type 2 diabetes, those CGMs are, I think, useless. They can actually lead to a lot of disordered eating.
Yep.
People develop disordered eating. And I could see it when I was wearing it for 2 weeks just so I could relate to my clients. Yes, I had the spikes, and I hate this word spike. It's
Yep.
just an increase in your blood sugar that it's normal. Your blood sugar increases after exercise, during stress. It's all normal reactions to keep, like you said, I love the examples that you brought up, to keep you alive, to keep you, if you need to run away from, a lion, like, back in the days, like it gives you that adrenaline rush and all that stuff. And the most important thing you mentioned that is related to my community, Hashimoto's, it activates the T3,
Yep.
the active thyroid that goes in your cells.
Yep.
And liver is one of the most major organs for that activation. So that's why a low carb diet is not recommended for someone with Hashimoto's. It's because of this T3 upregulation and all that stuff. Because the last T3, so you have all this T4 hormone, it either converts into T3 or it downregulates to reverse T3, which
Yep.
is a break for your system, for your metabolism, and it exacerbates all the symptoms. So why do, like, real quick, why do we, people with Hashimoto's, tend to develop type 2 and type 1 diabetes? Like, what's the deal here?
Yeah, yeah, this is such a big one, and it can be either way. Like Hashimoto's can increase the risk for insulin resistance in type 2 diabetes or even
Mhm,
type 1, for example, and vice
mhm,
versa, right? And I can kind of walk through both of them and just give you a small example of why that can be the case. If we look at something like Hashimoto's, what we know, especially when it's not controlled or regulated, we know we tend to have a little bit lower metabolism. Where in metabolism, the way that I define it is the
mhm,
ability to convert the food that you eat into energy. That's it.
mhm,
And if we're not able to do that as well, the carbs that we eat or in the bloodstream, they stay there a little bit longer. And when they stay there a little bit longer, well, we're more reliant on insulin to regulate that because remember,
mhm,
the body doesn't like big discrepancies in blood sugar and wants to keep it balanced. And so over time, as that happens more and more, we become more reliant on insulin. And then that's no bueno because if we're more reliant on insulin, we're going to become more insulin resistant over time if that's not addressed through lifestyle and
mhm,
nutrition. The more blood sugar swings that we do have, the more, again, going back to what we talked about before, the more of that energy crisis that we have. We have a lot of energy in the bloodstream, not enough at the cell level. And so our stress response gets activated, right? Now we become more insulin resistant. Those blood sugar swings become bigger. And if we look at something like type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance, one of the biggest drivers of that is stress. And
Mhm.
so that is particularly one of the main reasons why someone with Hashimoto's could develop something
Mhm.
like insulin resistance or type 2, because the thyroid hormone is such a big driver of
Mhm.
helping your body process food and carbohydrates. And in the thyroid space, a good person to look into, if viewers are interested, is a guy by the name of Broda Barnes. He was a physician way back in like the 1950s or 60s, I want to say, mid 1900s, but he was revolutionary in the way that he helped people with thyroid conditions, whether that be something like a Hashimoto's or like hypothyroidism in general.
Mhm.
So he showed that when people had prediabetes or type 2, was fixed when they improved their thyroid health. And then vice
Mhm.
versa. If we have type 2 diabetes and we have more of the blood sugar swings, it's kind of the same thing, where at the cell
Mhm.
level, we have the energy crisis, stress increases. And when stress increases, especially from an autoimmune perspective, one, we get the suppression of the immune system. So the immune system isn't working as well.
Mhm.
Cortisol initially can be something that can be quite anti-inflammatory. That's why people use it as a steroid, for example, for autoimmune conditions. Like, it has some
Mhm.
benefits, but over time, if our body isn't able to produce as much cortisol, which happens when you really exhaust your adrenal glands, now we don't get that anti-inflammatory benefit. And so we have the combination of a suppressed immune system and then high inflammation, which are big triggers for autoimmune conditions like a Hashimoto's or a type 1
Mhm.
diabetes. And so both of these are intrinsically connected. If you have one, you're more than likely to have some semblance of the other.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think you mentioned this inflammation, right? And we're talking about chronic inflammation and chronic stress. And since Hashimoto's is an autoimmune condition, meaning that the immune system attacks the thyroid, this chronic inflammation can affect other organs and systems, including this insulin producing cells in the pancreas, right? And it disrupts glucose metabolism, increasing the risk of insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. And I see it all the time. I would say probably 50% of my patients have type 2 diabetes.
Mm. Yep, I believe it.
Very, very, very common. That's why blood sugar regulation is, like we talked about earlier, is the foundation of all medical nutrition therapy approaches that we, as a registered dietitian, are licensed to implement.
Mhm.
So I'm so glad we're having this conversation. Now, how you already like you touched on non-food contributors to blood sugar dysregulation. Would you say it's stress, right? Sleep and lack of exercise. Can you elaborate on those things?
Yeah, yep. There's big ones. I would actually, in terms of hierarchy, I'd probably put stress first. And
Mhm.
when I say stress, what I like to lean on a little bit more is your stress response. It's not necessarily always just external circumstances, because you can have some crazy external circumstances and maybe have 4 kids at home and be working and have lots of extracurriculars. But if you have a resilient enough routine that's building up that resilience for you, where you can tolerate that, you might not have any issues with your blood sugar, your health, because you have this buffer at play. Now, do most people have that? Probably not. And so that's where stress starts to become more of a difficulty, is when we can't tolerate it as well. We start to get more issues, especially when it comes to blood sugar, thyroid health, and symptoms as a result. And so what I kind of look at, especially with clients, and this is something that really resonates with them, is sometimes I just say, like, you don't have a blood sugar problem, you have a stress problem. And how
Mhm.
I kind of compare that is, if you think about, like, if you guys drive or viewers drive, you have on your car dashboard, you have an engine light that turns on maybe when your oil quality is low or your gas is low, right? It's a signal that something is off. And that's how I look at blood sugar. It's a signal that something is off, but it's not the problem in itself. There's something underneath it. And stress is one of those pieces. And so what I look at for clients is, how can we build a routine in a way of eating that really helps you build up that resilience to stress, so that when you do encounter it, when you do have stressful days, when you do have a bad day at work or a bad day at home, that it's no longer driving the reason why you have blood sugar or thyroid issues. So that's number one.
Mhm.
Number two, I would say, is actually circadian rhythm. And circadian rhythm, if you guys aren't familiar, is really the group of hormones that your body releases in response to light or darkness outside, which is crazy to me to think about. Like lighting
Mhm.
has the ability to influence the hormonal profile of your body. Like it's amazing. And when we look at something of like circadian rhythm hormones, there's a few that come to mind. One of which is cortisol. And so much of the talk around cortisol, it's a bad thing. Well, it is anti-inflammatory, at least at the beginning. And two, it helps to wake us up, help us to give us that energy, it helps us to be alert, especially in the morning. And so it's good that we actually have enough of that. Now, if we don't have enough, we tend to feel really crummy in the morning, like we just slept a full night's of sleep and we feel like we need to sleep again. So if someone has low cortisol, that can be problematic. Same thing for the end of the evening. We need to produce something called melatonin, and many people might be familiar with that, with the sleep aid that it can bring. And
Mhm.
many people do try to take it as a supplement. I don't think that that's probably the best strategy, but we produce it if our circadian rhythm is within balance. The problem is if we're not able to produce that enough. And when that happens, as a result of often the lighting environment that we're in, maybe
Mhm.
not going outside enough, maybe not going outside in the morning throughout the day, and or being exposed to too much artificial light at the wrong times, especially at the end of the night. Maybe we're on screens like this, maybe we're on our phone watching Netflix, whatever the case may be. But your body is getting now a signal that it's 11 a.m. in the morning. It's 1 p.m. in the afternoon, right? Even though it's actually 11 p.m. So we're getting signals of daytime, even though it's nighttime. And that's where things get a little bit confusing
Mhm.
because as a result of that, our body's not able to produce as much melatonin. And that melatonin helps us to be ready for sleep, helps us to be more drowsy. And so if we're not producing that, we automatically produce more cortisol. And again, going back to that stress response, that's not good. And one of the interesting things that I found with people that have circadian rhythm problems is they often have, of course, sleep challenges, but they're often more insulin resistant, they're more weight loss resistant, they
Mhm.
have appetite issues, energy issues, and thyroid issues, oftentimes, that conglomerate. And I'll find when they maybe they haven't eaten in 7, 8, 9+ hours, yet their blood sugar in the morning is rising significantly beyond 100. And that is a key sign that your circadian rhythm is dysregulated, that your liver is kicking out more glucose in your bloodstream without even
Mhm.
having to eat. And so I would say those are the top two when it comes to non-nutrition. Now, the
Mhm.
third one would be movement. And when we look at movement, especially, there's two kinds. And the first one I would look at, especially for someone that has like thyroid issues and maybe they're really feeling fatigued and depleted, like a light exercise would probably be most beneficial frequently throughout the day because it's less intense, it's less depleting, and it's less stressful.
Mhm.
And doesn't mean intense exercise is bad, but just for that person, I think can be helpful because it helps to use up extra glucose within the bloodstream. Therefore, you're not spiking so much after a meal. And so that can be utilized throughout the day as something as simple as a 5, 10, 15, 20-minute walk.
And is
Now,
that right after a meal, or do can we wait?
good question. Just depends on the person. If you're someone that is spiking significantly after a meal, and when I say significantly, probably significantly beyond 140, then I would say immediately after the meal, like within 15 minutes, I think that could be good. But if your choice is to either do it at some other time or not do it, I would say absolutely just do it. Like the timing, matters significantly less than just fitting it in. So great question. But yeah, if it's someone is spiking, I would say, close to after the meal is best that you can. And ideally, if it can be outside, because you kill two birds with one stone, you get the circadian rhythm benefit, and then you
Mhm.
get the walking benefit as well, and of course all the stress benefits that walking provides. So
Mhm.
we have that. And then we have like more intensive movement. And that's probably for more advanced people that have a little bit less symptoms. Maybe that's been helped and
Mhm.
improved and their energy is back. Well, maybe they can dive into some of that where maybe they're looking at sports and maybe sprints or weightlifting where they're really building some extra muscle. And if we think from a blood sugar perspective, when you have extra muscle, you have more real estate to store that glucose instead of it sitting in the bloodstream. So it's huge. And I'll
Mhm.
wrap it up with this too, because I think it's really fascinating part of this hypothyroid conversation. There is a theory called the personal fat threshold, and it was a theory produced by a guy by the name of Roy Taylor. He's a researcher in the
Mhm.
UK, really brilliant guy. And I see this in the context of those that are really weight loss or insulin resistant and maybe have some thyroid issues as well. We often look at diabetes as being like this thing that's just to people that are overweight and obese. But the interesting thing throughout my career that I found, especially when I was starting out, I was like, wow, I'm working with a lot of overweight and obese people, but they don't have any signs of blood sugar issues. Their insulin
Mhm.
looks normal, their blood sugar looks normal, A1C looks fine, yet they have a lot of this weight. And this personal fat threshold really helped to explain that, because if someone has a high personal fat threshold, they can store a lot of fats underneath their skin. And while as unsightly as many people believe that that is, it's less metabolically impactful because it's not impacting their blood sugar. So you can have a lot of weight but not have blood sugar issues. Yet, if someone has a low personal fat threshold, meaning they have a low ability to store fat underneath their skin, they can more easily have blood sugar issues than someone that is overweight or obese. And the reason has all to do with not the sheer amount of fat, but where it's stored. If the fat is stored within the pancreas and the pancreas and the liver don't work as well. Your pancreas doesn't kick out that insulin that we need to regulate our blood sugar, and then the liver kicks out more glucose into your bloodstream,
Mhm.
resulting in that rise in blood sugar, right? And so we get many people that are lean and like they can't explain it. Like I'm healthy, I live healthy, I'm lean, I'm a normal weight, yet I have blood sugar issues. Well, it has a lot to do with that.
Yep, that was me. That's why when I was wearing CGM, I noticed that my fasting blood sugar in the morning was high.
Yeah.
And of course, so it took me about 2 months to do all this nutrition and non-nutrition approaches to implement into my life to decrease my hemoglobin A1C and my fasting glucose. I don't have a family history of diabetes, but I was developing insulin resistance, and I live by the book. Right? Well, I practice what I preach, and I was still in trouble. So it's so important to dial in. And since we're talking about, not a lot of people not don't know that they have insulin resistance, what role does the root cause testing play in the fighting finding hidden imbalances?
Yeah, with insulin resistance, it's kind of interesting. There is I was actually planning to go a different direction with this, but since you said insulin resistance, I actually go in this direction. There is something called iron overload or iron
Mhm.
recycling issues, which plays a huge role in insulin resistance. And we have found I can't count. We have had so many clients that have had iron like anemia, for example, where they've
Mhm.
had low iron, and as a result of taking like iron supplements or iron infusions, their blood sugar is like skyrocketed. Where instead of normal blood sugar, now they have prediabetes or even type 2. We've
Mhm.
seen that before. And so iron recycling issues are a huge player that drive insulin resistance, because the extra iron, like I'm not saying it's bad because it's absolutely essential nutrient, and within the right balance, we absolutely need it. The problem is when it becomes more in excess of what we need, then it starts
Mhm.
to become what's called a pro-oxidant, which means it promotes more inflammation. And the more inflammation that we have in our body, the more that our blood sugar rises. And going back into your point that you just mentioned, Natalia, when that liver is stored within our liver, or when that iron is stored within our liver tends to kick out more glucose into our bloodstream, raising blood sugar in the morning, even if we're, of course, a normal weight.
Mhm.
And so minerals like that can be super impactful. And, we run a series of tests. One is called the HTMA. HTMA is hair tissue mineral analysis. If viewers aren't familiar with that, that can be very impactful, especially for those with Hashimoto's and thyroid issues. And then we run something called a blood sugar and Monty panel lab, which can look at pieces like iron, for example, that can promote more insulin resistance and blood sugar issues. Iron just being one of those pieces.
It's amazing. Yes. I think it's so important to look to first work with somebody who understands the condition and the complexity of it and can look at things that most people or doctors, just, non functional, just conventional medicine doctors don't even look at it. I never even heard of this condition or just this iron overload and recycling in my school, in 5 years of medical school.
Yeah.
So it's incredible of how many aspects we need to look at. And I would say I would add a GI map stool test
Mm,
to the testing, because research has shown that an imbalance in the gut microbiome, known of course as dysbiosis, can negatively affect insulin sensitivity
mm,
and contribute to insulin resistance. And I think the GI map test, well, it identifies harmful bacteria, yeast, right? It's other pathogens in the gut, and can lead to systematic inflammation. And this inflammation can impair, like we said, the body's ability to respond to
mhm,
insulin, leading to elevated blood sugar levels. The GI map can also identify an overgrowth of certain bacteria or fungi, such as like Candida and Pseudomonas, which is
yeah,
very common in people with Hashimoto's. And those two bacteria are linked to insulin resistance and poor glucose metabolism. So I think it's important, depending on what people, if you already done all the testings, the basic panel, I think to look into the stool test, it would be a great insight. I always say, like, this is one of the best investments in your health, and you're literally looking
mhm,
inside your gut,
right, right.
inside your health, if you want to, like, dial in on insulin sensitivity.
Yeah, I will comment on that with the like something like SIBO, for example, or Candida. Oftentimes, if you look at the research, it's connected to iron issues, in part, and because if we have iron overload, which can, iron can be stored within our guts, and so if we have iron there, it's a food for a lot of these pathogenic bacteria that feed off of that, and they stick around longer. That we have that iron in place versus if we can
Mhm,
improve the mineral balance, we can improve things in part like SIBO and Candida because they start in part because you
mhm,
have, iron issues most likely.
mhm. So you mentioned iron, right? That's a big one. Are there any other minerals that are important or essential for blood sugar balance?
Yeah, great question. There are a few. Now, if we're looking at blood sugar balance, what I would probably say is one of the more important, and especially for your audience too, is potassium. And potassium is key for a few different reasons. One of the tests that we run that I just mentioned is the HTMA, which is a hair tissue mineral analysis test. And which with the HTMA, we get a small sample of your hair and we send it off to a lab. And since hair follicle is at the cell level where all the action is taking place, it's one of the more important tests that we can run. And after we get that sample back, that hair follicle sample is basically a reflection of the mineral content that your cells have access to. And one of the ratios on that test is something called a thyroid ratio. And a thyroid ratio is the ratio between the mineral calcium and then the mineral
Mhm,
potassium. And what we find when clients have a normal ratio, which is around like four-ish, a normal
mhm,
ratio of this, their thyroid works better, but they also have better blood sugar as well. And
mhm,
this can be high for a few different reasons. And when it's high, we tend to have problems with thyroid and blood sugar. Number one, what ends up happening is we can have high calcium, where the calcium on our hair test is really high, which can happen because we're really living on vitamin D supplements when we really shouldn't be taking
mhm,
those. We're taking calcium supplements when we really shouldn't be taking those. We have had a lot of stress and trauma in our lives. We see that
mhm,
quite a bit, and then we're having lots of blood sugar swings. So we're really reliant on insulin to keep that blood sugar within range. We see that quite a bit.
mhm,
So we could have a high calcium, and or we could have a low potassium, and that could be simply because we're not eating enough. We require
mhm,
the adequate intake for potassium is around 4,800 milligrams, which is quite a bit. So it could be as simple as that, but more often than not, we find it could be a combination of that plus stressors that are wasting through
mhm,
those nutrients a lot quicker, where we're not able to hold on to minerals. And so many people think about minerals as, hey, it's a supplement that I got to take. 75% of the work that we find is, can you help your body hold on to that mineral more?
mhm,
And that comes through the way that you design your nutrition, the way that you strategically eat throughout the day to be able to do that. Because when that ratio is out of balance, what ends up happening is there's a calcium kind of shell that's formed around the cells of your
mhm,
body at the cell level,
mhm,
and thyroid hormone can't get in as proficiently, and glucose can't get in as proficiently. And so if that's not happening, well, no matter how much medication in terms of thyroid that we're taking, it doesn't matter. It's not going to get access to the cell where we really need it to get the benefit. Same
Mhm.
thing with glucose. Even if we're doing everything right, it's not going to allow that glucose access to the cell, which raises blood sugar. So this can be really impactful to look at minerals like calcium and potassium, even things like magnesium, of course, too, copper, iron, all those minerals are
Mhm.
helpful. But for your audience, I think that could be an interesting one to look at.
Absolutely. And the fact that people are taking handfuls of these supplements, minerals, vitamins, and thinking that that's what they're going to absorb, I always say it's not what you take or eat, it's what you absorb. And with candida and SIBO and all those chronic gut infections, increased intestinal permeability, we don't absorb all the not just pills that we take, but even the minerals and vitamins from food. So that's point number one I wanted to make. And second, that's a second question. Can someone like take their hair and just send it to you guys, or do you have to have somebody in person?
Good question. So how we send it out is like test kits. So we will, it's kind of like a little bit old school. So we'll send it via physical mail. My assistant would rather, and we send it to their address. They ship it out to a lab in Texas that does the analysis for those.
Oh, that's amazing. I want to
Mhm.
do that. I've never heard of it.
Yeah,
That
yeah, it's
that
it's
would
really
be a great.
interesting. I think it could be even if you just looked into it for your own patients. The thyroid ratio that we talked about can be really impactful, and if you learn to interpret it, it takes some time to be able to interpret it well. But
Mhm.
I think it can be very impactful, especially for those that have more thyroid, blood sugar symptoms, things like that.
I love it. I love learning about resources like this
Yeah,
and new tests
yeah,
that can help you fine tune things. Because sometimes you feel like you're doing everything right, especially when it comes to blood sugar management, and it's just not budging. Your hemoglobin A1C not budging. So you have a lot of good resources, and I want for our audience, I want to. You mentioned that you have a free training, actually two free trainings, right? One that will help you transform your blood sugar from big swings to balance, and the 21-day blood sugar reset. Can you tell
yeah.
our audience a little bit about it?
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. The first one that you mentioned, transforming your blood sugar from big swings to balanced, that is a culmination of the work that we've done with clients. It shows a lot of client stories, people that we work with, of various blood sugar issues, whether that be people with type 1, type 2 insulin resistance. And we really look at the root cause of what is contributing to their blood sugar imbalances so they can eat carbs and feel good at the same time. And so you'll see a lot of wins. You'll see our process for how we've helped others be able to do that. And so if you're looking, for improvements in blood sugar, that can be a great place to start to see how other clients of ours have been able to do that. And then if you're looking for like a quick win, like within the next 30 days or so, the 21-day course that you mentioned can be an absolutely great place to start because it gives you some of the foundational habits that are really key to improving your blood sugar, nutrition, and otherwise, to really start seeing an improvement in your blood sugar within 30 days or less. And this was a campaign that we sent out like last year, and we had so many people do so well with it that we just made it a free course within our program.
I love it. I may even sign up for this because I
Yeah,
love a little challenge and I'll send my clients over there because we love, as human beings, we love structure, right? We
yeah,
like to follow certain things. And especially these two trainings being completely free, you have no excuse not to sign up. You have nothing to lose.
yeah.
So, Isaac, I'm going to leave all of your information, your website, of course, your Instagram handle, everything under this podcast episode and or YouTube video, whatever people are tuning in from. So they will be able to find those free trainings, learn a little bit more about you, about your practice, and other practitioners that are working for you, and maybe reach out and do the testings, the hair testings,
Yeah.
and all that stuff. So I know you have to go. We really appreciate your time. And thank you so much for sharing actionable tips today. It was your wealth of knowledge. And I cannot wait to have you on another podcast. Maybe we can
Yeah.
dial in into one topic, maybe circadian rhythm or something.
Yeah, yeah.
So
There's
that
so
would
many
be.
rabbit holes that we could go down. I think, an hour it can sometimes be a little bit too short for some of the topics that we discuss. So happy to jump on again. And again, thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to having you next time.
Yeah, thanks, Natalia.
Bye, everyone.